If you don't want to come, you don't have to.
You will go alone?
Sure.
Stop, William Robinson. I will accompany you. You may need protection.
I'm big enough to take care of myself.
True.
Before massive sci-fi franchises dominated television, there was Lost in Space, a strange little show that started as serious space adventure before spiraling into something far more bizarre. Behind the scenes, cast tension grew. Characters were rewritten, costumes became difficult to wear, and the production constantly fought budget problems. In this video, we're counting down 20 weird facts that reveal how Lost in Space became one of the strangest and most unforgettable sci-fi shows of the 1960s. 20. The Robinson family was almost completely different. When viewers first met the Robinson family, they looked like the perfect futuristic household, intelligent, calm, and united against the dangers of deep space. But the version audiences eventually saw was very different from the show's earliest plans. In the original concepts, several family members had much harsher personalities, and the relationships inside the group were far less warm. The producers first imagined a colder survival story where tension inside the family would create as much danger as the strange alien worlds around them. Some early drafts even gave certain characters stronger authority roles, while others were pushed into the background entirely. Everything started changing once the pilot was completed. Producers realized the serious tone alone was not connecting the way they hoped, so characters slowly began shifting into more approachable versions of themselves. Dialogue was softened, personalities became friendlier, and the family dynamic leaned more into adventure rather than constant conflict. These rewrites quietly reshaped the entire direction of the series before most viewers even knew what the show was supposed to be. The final cast chemistry ended up saving the series in many ways. The warmth between the actors gave Lost in Space its heart, especially during the more bizarre episodes later on. Without that believable family connection, the show's increasingly strange stories may never have worked at all. And once the Robinson family was completely reshaped, this next fact reveals an even stranger change behind the show's most iconic character. 19. The robot originally looked much scarier. The robot from Lost in Space eventually became one of the most lovable machines in television history, but the earliest designs looked far more unsettling. The production team created their first machine design, which they wanted to create an experience which users would perceive as cold and sharp and terrifying. The robot design used early sketches to create a metallic design which showed darker elements that made the character appear as a dangerous war machine instead of a protective friend. The design concepts created a facial expression which showed no emotions while displaying extreme seriousness that made the character seem dangerous when standing next to the Robinson children. The producers decided to change their original idea after they discovered that home-watching families needed to become the primary audience for their series. The network worried younger viewers might feel uncomfortable if the robot looked too frightening. The designers created body design changes by making the shape of the robot's body less sharp and more rounded, while they developed the robot's human-like walking style. The robot character developed from a terrifying intergalactic machine into a trustworthy protector companion who audiences would trust. The character's softer image became the main reason why children formed a connection with him throughout the show's initial broadcast period. The robot developed his famous line through an unplanned sequence, which became his most recognized dialogue. Danger, Will Robinson started as simple warning dialogue during episodes, but viewers repeated it constantly. The phrase exited the show to become one of the most recognizable lines in sci-fi history. 18. Dr. Smith was never supposed to stay. It is hard to imagine Lost in Space without Dr. Zachary Smith, but the truth is, he was never meant to become a permanent part of the series. When production first started, actor Jonathan Harris was only hired for a limited number of episodes. Dr. Smith was originally written as a selfish troublemaker whose actions would create danger for the Robinson family before eventually disappearing from the story. The producers saw him as a temporary villain, not the face of the entire show. Everything changed once Harris stepped in front of the cameras. Almost immediately, producers noticed he brought a completely different energy to the role. Instead of playing Smith as a simple evil saboteur, Harris filled scenes with dramatic reactions, nervous comedy, and exaggerated insults that made the character strangely entertaining. He often improvised lines during filming, adding little comments and theatrical moments that made the cast laugh and grabbed attention behind the scenes. The producers quickly realized audiences were responding to him far more strongly than expected. As the show continued, Dr. Smith slowly transformed from a dangerous villain into the center of the series itself. Entire episodes began revolving around his schemes, arguments, and comedic disasters. In many ways, Lost in Space stopped being only about the Robinson family surviving space. It became the Dr. Smith Show, and viewers could not get enough of him. 17. The show borrowed ideas from Swiss Family Robinson. The television series Lost in Space displayed its plot elements as familiar content which existed before the show first aired. The series used Swiss Family Robinson as its essential story material, which formed its main plot structure. Both stories followed a family suddenly cut off from civilization and forced to survive in a dangerous, unknown world. The simple solution showed intelligent people who created scientific advances through observation of nature. The Robinson family became lost in deep space because they remained trapped between two alien worlds, which included strange beings and cosmic cataclysms. The two things matched each other through strong common features. The family worked together to solve problems, protect one another, and adapt to environments they did not fully understand. Just like the original Swiss Family Robinson story, survival depended on intelligence, teamwork, and creativity rather than brute force alone. The family name itself served as a direct link to the original source material. The creators of the show proved that survival stories already had an established audience base because they developed an innovative space adventure which used existing storytelling patterns to create future space entertainment for the 1960s audience. The program used traditional narrative structure together with contemporary science fiction elements to create a unique identity which distinguished it from other shows that aired during its time period. The audience watched more than astronauts who explored the universe. The audience observed a family who attempted to create a home once they reached total separation from Earth. The emotional survival element defined Lost in Space through a special emotional quality which other science fiction shows during that period lacked, especially during its first two seasons before the show adopted more bizarre and comedic elements. 16. The Jupiter 2 was smaller than it looked. The Jupiter 2 looked massive on television, almost like a fully functioning home drifting through deep space. Inside the ship, viewers saw detailed control panels, sleeping areas, scientific equipment, and enough room for the Robinson family to survive endless adventures. But behind the scenes, the famous spacecraft was far smaller than audiences realized. Most of the interior sets were squeezed tightly inside cramped sound stages where cameras, lights, props, and actors had to compete for space at the same time. The production team relied heavily on clever camera work to create the illusion that the ship was larger than it really was. Certain walls could be removed so cameras could fit into impossible angles, while narrow hallways were filmed carefully to make them seem longer and wider. Directors often used tight framing and strategic lighting to hide how confined the sets truly were. On screen, the Jupiter 2 looked advanced and spacious. Off-screen, it often felt crowded and chaotic. The actors themselves regularly struggled moving around all the equipment packed into the sets. Large cameras sat just outside frame lines, while wires and props filled every available corner. Scenes involving multiple cast members became especially difficult because there was barely enough room for everyone to stand comfortably. Despite those limitations, the crew still managed to make the Jupiter 2 feel believable. helping turn it into one of the most recognizable spacecraft in classic television history. 15. The robot costume was miserable to wear. The robot from Lost in Space achieved widespread popularity, but the experience of wearing its costume proved to be a disappointing experience for actors. Bob May, the actor, had to spend extensive time inside his heavy mechanical suit, which allowed him to perform robotic movements that appeared fluid to viewers, yet required him extreme physical effort. The costume needed to be used because it was built with bulky elements, which created difficulties for actors to perform their roles throughout extended periods of time in bright studio lights. The robot required actors to maintain their focus while maintaining their body balance and executing precise movements to create a realistic performance on screen. The heat problem created the most significant difficulty. The suit reached temperatures which became unendurable after a short duration. The design restricted airflow, which caused the heavy materials to retain heat, making May wet with sweat throughout his time on set. The costume created major problems for him because it restricted his ability to see through the material, which made him move carefully through area where many other people were present with their props and cables. The combination of limited mobility from the suit and restricted sightlines made it difficult to perform even basic tasks. The robot's iconic head movements, which most viewers assumed were operated by its performer, actually functioned through multiple control methods. Separate puppeteers operated parts of the head and mechanical features from off-camera to create more lifelike reactions. The production team needed to achieve synchronization between their multiple members to transform the robot into a functioning character. The final result looked effortless, but behind the scenes, it was an uncomfortable and highly complicated performance every single episode. 14. The theme song changed completely. One of the clearest signs that Lost in Space was changing could be heard before each episode even began. During the first season, the show opened with darker and more dramatic music that matched its original serious science fiction tone. The early theme felt tense, mysterious, and almost cinematic, warning viewers that the Robinson family was trapped in dangerous and unpredictable parts of the universe. Combined with the black and white visuals of the first season, the opening created a much more serious atmosphere than many people remember today. But by the second season, the entire mood of the series started shifting. Producers noticed audiences responding more strongly to the lighter moments, especially the comedic scenes involving Dr. Smith and the robot. As the stories became stranger and more playful, the opening music changed with them. The newer theme sounded brighter, faster, and more adventurous, almost like a cheerful invitation into another bizarre space disaster waiting for the Robinson family. The serious survival tone slowly gave way to colorful entertainment built around humor and outrageous situations. That new opening reflected the show's complete transformation. Lost in Space was no longer trying to be grounded science fiction. It had become a campy family adventure filled with exaggerated villains, unusual aliens, and comedic chaos. Even viewers who never noticed the shift directly could feel it the moment the second season theme began playing. The music quietly announced that the show was becoming something entirely different. 13. The show accidentally became campier over time. The show Lost in Space aired its first episode with a serious tone which created an unfunny experience through its overblown villains and strange alien interactions. The show established its initial episodes as serious science fiction stories which explored survival and space exploration threats and dangers of isolation. The Robinson family faced real threats, which created a tense atmosphere throughout the show. The show presented multiple episodes which examined how people respond to fear and uncertainty while fighting to survive in distant locations from Earth. The show developed into its present form through its initial development, which created a traditional science fiction adventure show that most viewers do not recognize today. The audience ratings for television shows started to create major changes throughout the entertainment industry. Producers observed that younger viewers found more enjoyment in the humorous parts of the show, which included Dr. Smith creating chaos on the Jupiter 2. The show introduced more comedic elements and outrageous adventures to attract new viewers as television competition increased. The show introduced strange aliens and ridiculous costumes, which included over-the-top situations as the show progressed through its seasons. The show started as serious storytelling, but evolved into campier entertainment, which used absurdity as its main storytelling element. Jonathan Harris transformed into Dr. Smith through that process. The show became famous because of his dramatic responses and his ability to insult others and create comic panic. Audiences enjoyed watching him argue and complain and create disasters, so writers started building entire episodes around his behavior. Dr. Smith became the main source of humor for the show, which destroyed its original 1965 science fiction atmosphere within Lost in Space. 12. Guy Williams secretly hated the direction of the show. Guy Williams, who played Professor John Robinson, reportedly became increasingly unhappy as Lost in Space changed over the years. During the first season, the show focused heavily on survival, science fiction danger, and the Robinson family working together against serious threats. Williams preferred that version of the series because it treated the story with more realism and emotional weight. As the father and leader of the family, his character originally stood at the center of the show's dramatic tension. But everything slowly shifted once producers realized audiences were reacting more strongly to the comedy. Dr. Smith's exaggerated behavior began receiving more screen time, while serious adventure stories became less important. Bright costumes, strange aliens, and ridiculous situations started replacing the darker survival themes from the beginning of the series. Williams reportedly disliked this growing focus on humor because he believed it weakened the quality of the storytelling. Instead of meaningful science fiction, the show was becoming louder, sillier, and far more campy with each passing season. Behind the scenes, that frustration allegedly created tension during production. While Jonathan Harris became the breakout star through comedy, Williams often found himself pushed further into the background. The Robinson family patriarch no longer carried the same importance he once had during Season 1. By the later seasons, many fans noticed the series revolved far more around Dr. Smith's antics than the family adventure concept that originally launched Lost in Space in the first place. 11. The monkey Debbie was actually a chimp in costume. Debbie, the small alien pet, who became popular with fans during Lost in Space's later seasons, served as one of the most unusual recurring characters throughout the series. The show depicted Debbie as a strange extraterrestrial creature, which matched the developing level of absurdity that the show maintained throughout its run. The actual situation was dead simple because it had more uncommon elements than ordinary ones. The alien character who played Debbie was actually a chimpanzee who wore special clothing to look more alien and futuristic. The production team added small outfits and accessories to help disguise the animal's real appearance. The team used tiny costumes and strange collars and decorative pieces to transform Debbie from an ordinary chimp into a mysterious companion who traveled from deep space. The production team used that specific technique because it provided them with the necessary low-cost creative solution to their ongoing production needs. The series used a trained animal as an alien sidekick because they wanted to avoid spending money on an expensive creature puppet and advanced special effects. The strange part is, Debbie was only the beginning. As the show got bigger, the creatures got cheaper, the tricks got bolder, and the whole universe started being built from whatever the studio could find. 10. The alien creatures were often cheap props. Lost in Space introduced viewers to strange monsters, mysterious aliens, and bizarre creatures almost every week. On television, these beings were supposed to represent the dangers hiding across the universe. But behind the scenes, Many of them were created with shockingly cheap materials because the production constantly struggled with budget limitations. The crew rarely had enough money to build advanced costumes or detailed creature effects, so improvisation became a normal part of making the show. To create alien life forms quickly, the production team used whatever materials they could find. Everyday objects, leftover fabrics, rubber pieces, plastic parts, and recycled costume materials were transformed into monsters with paint and creative lighting. Some creatures were little more than actors wearing strange masks or oversized outfits covered in random decorations. Others looked like simple props pulled together at the last minute before filming started. The series depended heavily on imagination because there simply was not enough money to make everything look realistic. Mena, the series used recycled props from other productions. The futuristic world of Lost in Space looked surprisingly detailed for a 1960s television show, but most of its technological elements did not originate from the show itself. The show used old studio warehouses, which contained props that had been used in previous movies and television shows, just like other productions of that time. The crew used storage rooms to find existing science fiction equipment and unusual machines, and assorted mechanical components, which they used to create all the futuristic devices needed for the Jupiter 2 and Alien worlds. The production team used existing props to create new visual elements because they painted props and made modifications and combined different pieces together. The production team transformed buttons and flashing lights and metal panels and plastic controls from other projects into state-of-the-art space equipment after making minor modifications. The audience rarely noticed because television moved quickly, and the strange designs blended naturally into the chaotic atmosphere of the show. The production team needed to create a realistic future appearance while avoiding expensive expenses. 8. The famous danger line was improvised differently at first. Today, it is impossible to hear the words "Danger, Will Robinson" without immediately thinking about Lost in Space. The dramatic warning became one of the most famous lines in science fiction history, repeated for decades in movies, television, and pop culture. But surprisingly, the robot's dialogue did not sound that way in the beginning. Early episodes gave the robot a much more formal and mechanical speaking style that felt colder and less emotional. The voice sounded stiff, precise, and heavily robotic, almost like a machine reading technical instructions instead of reacting to danger. As filming continued, the delivery slowly began to change. The actors and production team realized the robot became far more entertaining when the warnings sounded urgent and dramatic, rather than calm and emotionless. Over time, the famous line evolved into a louder, more panicked warning filled with personality. Instead of simply sounding like a machine reporting information, the robot suddenly felt protective, emotional, and strangely human whenever Will Robinson was in trouble. That change gave the character much stronger chemistry with the rest of the cast. 7. Lost in Space faced constant budget problems. For a television show about exploring distant planets and surviving in deep space, Lost in Space operated under surprisingly tight financial limits almost from the very beginning. Science fiction was expensive to produce during the 1960s, especially for a weekly television schedule demanding new planets, creatures, effects, and costumes every episode. The ambitious ideas behind the series often pushed far beyond what the budget could comfortably support, forcing the crew to constantly search for cheaper ways to keep the show running. Special effects became one of the biggest financial problems. Creating alien worlds, futuristic technology, and giant space disasters required far more resources than the production actually had available. To save money, The series reused sets repeatedly, sometimes redressing the same locations to appear like completely different planets. Costumes were recycled constantly as well, often modified with small changes, so audiences would not immediately recognize them from earlier episodes. Even props and visual effects shots were reused whenever possible to avoid extra costs during production. 6. The show competed directly with Star Trek. During the 1960s, television suddenly became obsessed with space. Audiences were fascinated by rockets, astronauts, and the growing real-world space race happening between world powers. Right in the middle of that science fiction boom, two major shows arrived almost side by side: Lost in Space and Star Trek. Both series explored futuristic adventures among the stars, featured strange alien encounters, and imagined humanity pushing far beyond Earth. Because of those similarities, networks and viewers constantly compared the two shows from the moment they appeared on television. Behind the scenes, ratings became a major source of pressure. Television executives closely watched which sci-fi series audiences preferred each week. Producers wanted their shows to stand out, especially as competition for viewers became more intense. At first, both programs shared certain similarities, including serious science fiction themes and dangerous adventures. But over time, their identities split apart dramatically as each show moved in a completely different direction. 5. Bill Mumy became one of the biggest child stars of sci-fi. For many viewers, the true heart of Lost in Space was not the parents, the spaceship, or even Dr. Smith. It was Will Robinson. Played by young actor Bill Mumy, the character quickly became one of the most recognizable children in science fiction television. At a time when most young characters in adventure shows stayed in the background, Will was placed directly at the center of danger almost every episode. Audiences watched him face monsters, alien worlds, and strange disasters week after week, turning Bill Mumy into a household name during the show's run. A huge reason for that popularity came from his connection with the robot. Their friendship became one of the defining relationships of the entire series. The robot protected Will constantly, while Will treated the machine more like a loyal companion than a piece of technology. That emotional bond gave the show warmth, even during its strangest storylines. Viewers became deeply attached to their scenes together, especially whenever the robot shouted its famous warnings to protect him from danger. 4. The black and white to color shift changed everything. When Lost in Space first premiered, the early episodes were filmed in black and white, giving the series a darker and more serious appearance. The shadows inside the Jupiter 2 looked harsher, alien planets felt more mysterious, and the dangers surrounding the Robinson family seemed far more intense. That visual style matched the show's original science fiction tone during Season 1, where survival and suspense mattered more than comedy. The black and white presentation also helped hide some of the production's cheaper effects and simpler costumes, making everything feel slightly more believable on screen. Once the series moved fully into color, the entire atmosphere changed almost immediately. Suddenly, the producers leaned heavily into bright costumes, flashy sets, and colorful alien designs that grabbed attention on television screens. Strange creatures became louder visually. Backgrounds became more exaggerated, and the overall look of the show felt much less grounded than before. The colorful presentation encouraged the series to embrace sillier adventures because the visuals themselves already looked more playful and theatrical. 3. Jonathan Harris refused to perform with real danger. Jonathan Harris may have played the dramatic and cowardly Dr. Smith on screen, but behind the scenes, the actor reportedly had very real concerns about dangerous filming situations. Harris strongly disliked working around animals, explosions, and physically risky stunt sequences during production. While other actors sometimes dealt with chaotic special effects or unpredictable creatures, Harris preferred staying as far away from genuine danger as possible. Considering how wild Lost in Space became during later seasons, that created an unusual challenge for the writers and production crew. To work around those concerns, scripts were often adjusted before filming even began. Scenes involving explosions, aggressive animals, or physically dangerous action would sometimes be rewritten to reduce Harris's involvement. Instead of placing Dr. Smith directly into risky situations, the show increasingly relied on dialogue-heavy comedy scenes where the character could panic, complain, or manipulate others without requiring difficult stunts. This actually fit perfectly with Dr. Smith's personality, making the changes feel natural to audiences watching at home. 2. The ending left fans frustrated for decades. For all its strange adventures, memorable characters, and famous catchphrases, Lost in Space ended with one major problem that haunted fans for decades. The original series never received a true conclusion. When the show was canceled after its third season, the Robinson family's journey through space simply stopped without a proper ending, explaining whether they ever made it home. Viewers who followed the family through years of danger, alien encounters, and disasters were suddenly left with unanswered questions and no real closure. That abrupt ending became even more frustrating because the series had built such a strong emotional connection with audiences. Fans wanted to know the final fate of the Robinsons, the robot, and even Dr. Smith, after spending so much time invested in their adventures. Instead, the story simply faded away when production ended. During the 1960s, television shows rarely planned long-term endings, but that did not make the unfinished conclusion any less disappointing for loyal viewers who expected some kind of final resolution. Yet the strangest twist is that the show's story did not end when it was canceled. In fact, this last one on the list reveals how Lost in Space became even bigger after leaving television, turning into a sci-fi classic people still remember decades later. 1. The show became more famous after cancellation. When Lost in Space originally aired during the 1960s, nobody could have predicted how long the show would survive after leaving television. While it attracted loyal viewers during its run, the real explosion in popularity happened years later after the series entered syndication. Reruns introduced the Robinson family to entirely new generations of audiences who discovered the show long after its cancellation. Children who never watched the original broadcasts suddenly became obsessed with the strange adventures, colorful aliens, and unforgettable characters playing on afternoon television. As the reruns spread, two characters rose far beyond the rest of the cast in popularity. The robot and Dr. Smith became genuine pop culture icons. Their dramatic arguments, famous warning lines, and bizarre chemistry turned into the defining image of the entire series. Even people who had never watched a full episode often recognized Danger Will Robinson immediately. The characters escaped the boundaries of the show itself and became permanently linked with classic science fiction television. Lost in Space was more than a strange 1960s sci-fi show. It was a mix of family drama, budget tricks, strange props, wild performances, and unforgettable characters. If you found this story interesting, please like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into stories you won't find anywhere else. Thanks for watching.